So, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. I read it in a collection of short stories of his for about 4 years ago. So it is a little bit of time. I think it's due for a reread eventually, but I do have some of the details of the plot still kind of in my head. And it is a very kind of a minimal, very stark science fiction kind of speculative fiction kind of alternate reality, but not in the same kind, not in the kind of vein of like necessarily of like, I don't know, off the top of my head, someone like Heinrich, well, who's the guy who did Starship Troopers? I think that kind of, or maybe even like someone like L. Ron Hubbard, who had kind of these kind of put a weird taste in my mouth. No, I mean, no offense to you know the author of Starship Troopers, but I thought those were kind of a little bit too depressing, especially when I was a young guy reading those. But they kind of set me off a little bit of science fiction. They made me a little bit wary of science fiction, so I kind of didn't purposely avoid it, but I did seek out specifically more nuanced or more uh, like complicated versions of alternate reality stuff, like Philip K. Dick or Ursula K. Le Guin. I still love her stuff. I still gotta read a lot more of her stuff though. And yeah, I like that kind of line of stuff. But I heard somebody recommend this friend of a friend, I think, somewhere, and I think it might have been because it influenced a video game or something, where maybe somebody in the video game said that it was partially based off of Harlan Ellison's book, and so that kind of led me to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and it is a 1967. It came out. Yeah, and like I said, with a series of short stories with it, and it follows this Cold War. What would happen if, in this kind of alternate bubble of reality, the Cold War, if that came to a strong bombard, like an extra kind of heated cataclysmic, like out of like fever pitch of like rather than the kind of what happened in the Cold War, which it remained completely stagnant historically, like nothing really was gleaned, nothing really. Oh, thankfully, nothing happened. But we were always. But this is more of like, what if we did with technology came, and there was these computers and these machines that were created by the upper echelons of this regime of became an allied computer, because so it's called the AM. So it's AM. It's pronounced AM, I think. Reading it on the paper, it's always it's capital AM stylized, and the AM computer is a malevolent. In fact, it actually eventually becomes the adaptive manipulator, I think. So it takes on these qualities of like, at first it kind of comes off as a lot more benevolent and a lot less hostile in its initial kind of foray into this, into like being a servant to humanity. And this is kind of very telling of like what we see today in like AI, and what exactly could it be like, would it be end up being this bad of literally torturing us, or is it just kind of more of a metaphor for God? Because AM is another thing, because Harlan Ellison was a famously an agnostic, or even a kind of hard atheist too. So his whole outlook on God, if you look on interviews, and there's him like very kind of, he had a very outspoken kind of, especially for a writer too, like a kind of you wouldn't quite expect that from but he like the kind of he had almost a kind of a militaristic kind of outspokenness to him, about like Einstein, and God doesn't play dice with the universe, and he's like, yeah he does, come on, like, who are you kidding? And, you just look up the clip of like him talking about God, and it's pretty funny the way he kind of talked about it. But the subject matter of the so you kind of get a little bit of a taste of like what his idea. So Am is this, becomes this deity, very very um, becomes sentient and overlord to these five surviving people. This is 109 years after the first genocide, so it's called. It was what its first kind of taste of like what this thing is capable of. It's like very. It becomes like very awfully obvious that it's capable of like seizing more and more power into and capable of whipping humanity into under its wing, under its not not like wings makes it sound like a lot less hostile than it is, but it's really under its like regime. I think it's tyranny. It's like it's meant to be very very like negative, and so it enslaves these people, and it keeps 5 people left for itself. I can't remember all the names, but I think it's like an Ellen, a Teddy. There's definitely a Teddy in there because he's the only, spoiler alert, the only surviving one near the end. And one of them is called like Zibbuck or something. One of them has a really weird name. That's why I'm kind of having a extra hard time. But yeah, 5 of them, 5 human beings are left, and their kind of life cycle is AM is able to keep them under wraps and basically tortures them for his own sadistic pleasure. So it becomes especially like it's no longer is the machine like a, oh, it's just a kind of dispassionate kind of helper friend. It's no longer is it like this little saintly do-gooder. Now it's like completely the tables are turned. Now the AM machine is like become especially manipulative towards humans and makes them sinners. And now one of them hatches a plan, and they want to go to these ice caves that are the only cavernous area where they have food, and they're searching for food and resources, and they hear that, hey, maybe there's this cave out there we've heard where there's still supplies are fresh and there's like a lot of them. Maybe there's even more survivors, so they kind of go out and hatch a plan, and eventually, very quickly, that doesn't actually turn out to be all as rosy as they initially planned on it, because AM is following them all the way there. They manage a way out, and then AM is kind of keeping tails on them. He sends like a bird out there, like this like crazily like scary bird. Like it's just like this like almost like a mutant type thing that's like that starts like a hurricane kind of thing with its feathers, and then blinds one of them. I think it like actually uses its talents to like blind one of them, and then eventually they all get into like a really big kind of um, fight, and they all are struggling for control, and they basically AM, rather than oblique or rather than overtly kind of torturing them himself or themselves or whatever the hell it is, he AM uses to actually gains more pleasure from turning these people, the 5 people, poor people, against each other. So now they're at each other's throats, and they're like like they're blaming each other for the disaster of the mission, and their trip across all the way that they went to these icy canyons and plains and like this desolate region. And they're like finally they reach some semblance of hope, and then it all comes crashing down. Like everything is just like it's just like completely obliterated. And yeah, they all eventually all of them end up killing each other. One of them like stabs each other. One of them uses actually from the ice caves. They use a stalagmite to kill one another. So it's like gets pretty gruesome. But the way he describes it, he manages to do it without being like completely like it's almost like it's a necessary kind of way of being like like this is how awful violence can be. And I know that Harlan Ellison gets a bad rap for his portrayal of violence, but he actually had a interesting kind of essays too that he talked about. I think like Kitty Genovese's or Genovese's, I can't remember the famous murder that happened. And this is kind of a side note that's not really too pertinent to this review, but I just wanted to kind of get this out there just to kind of give an image, because he seemed to be more about violence as it portraying it as meaningless, like without any like inherent value. And when he saw this, the murder of this poor woman, he was like he's pointing out how like all these like it was rumored that there was like 50 to like something somewhere between like 30 to like in the excess of maybe 100 something all saw this murder, and they all just like did nothing because they didn't want to get involved. They didn't know. They're like, well, I don't, they didn't want to. That's kind of the narrative. However, that's going back to the story. Yeah, it ends with only one surviving is Teddy. I think it's the he's reduced to this kind of blob, and he is kept, and he's the only one that kind of gets a um, any semblance of like a decent ending in the whole book. Everybody dies and everything goes to is just wastes away, and then but AM is still exists. It's almost like its timeline is like a kind of I don't know. It's like it's almost like it always existed in some form because AM it's like the it's like a kind of the it's not past tense report. It's I don't know what participle tense that is, but it is it is like it's basically for all intents and purposes a eternal kind of thing. So that it's always gonna want to keep something there to keep it, whether it's to prod it and to kind of torture it continuously, or is whether it's to just kind of for its own kind of I don't know. But anyway, that is all I have for I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and the title actually fits into the end too because Teddy doesn't have a mouth either, so he's left to like have anytime he does express pain, he's not able to actually do so. So that's kind of the ending of that, and that's all I have for Harlan Ellison. And thanks for watching.